Welcome to the Legacy in Motion podcast. I am your host, Samuel Teka, a second generation Ethiopian Canadian American, a local church pastor in Austin, Texas, and the Diaspora Network's Next Gen Catalyst. This is the podcast where we equip diaspora leaders to build healthy and thriving intergenerational ministries. Today, I'm joined with Reverend Cindy Wu, Director of the Diaspora Ministries at Mosaic Formation, a Christian spiritual formation ministry she co-founded with her husband, David. In a world marked by increasing polarization and cultural complexity, today we're going to be talking about intercultural agility, which is an essential leadership skill. How do we navigate cultural differences with wisdom and also with empathy? How do we anticipate? How do we interpret? How do we adjust and honor the cultural behaviors of others while creating spaces where people could truly flourish? We'll explore these questions and more in today's conversation with Cindy. Enjoy the podcast.
Another way to cultivate humility is to take risks so that you make yourself dependent on God. Anytime you are trying to do something difficult, like intergenerational ministry, while trying to remain truthful to yourself and your convictions, it's going to be risky. And sometimes our fear of failure, like we talked about when it comes to even engaging people of different cultures or different generations, it's just risky. And so being willing to put yourself out there, get outside of your comfort zone, puts you in a place of dependence on the Lord.
Okay, so Cindy, thanks for being on the podcast. My question for you, the very first question I have is intercultural agility. What is it? And why do you think it's important in our world today? Like, what is the value of intercultural agility?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Sam. I mean, intercultural agility is a term that is used by many people, but the place where I specifically got trained in teaching it is called Knowledge Works. And the way that they define intercultural agility is that it's the ability to create new cultural spaces with greater empathy and more effective communication. And the way that you do this is by anticipating, interpreting, and then adjusting to the culturally defined behavior of others. So that's kind of the textbook definition, but it basically means that where two or more are gathered, there is the potential to create this third space between them. And that space should honor all of the members of the group with some aspect of their culture. And the only way that we can do that is if we understand what culture is, how to interpret people's behaviors as it is defined and informed by their culture, and then how we can adjust to cultural difference with empathy and understanding. And I think this is just a really important topic right now because of how much the world has changed. The demographics of the world has changed to where there's so much more of a variety of people living all around the world than ever before in human history.
Right.
And as the global population has changed, the way that we define culture has also changed. For example, maybe 50, 75 years ago, it was very helpful to think about culture through national boundaries or ethnic boundaries and say, Mexican culture does this, Taiwanese culture does this. But today, because there's so much interaction with people from all over the world all the time, we really need to think of culture as being personally defined. Each person has a unique cultural wiring that is informed by life experiences, personality, family of origin, and ethnic or national culture. And so, because the globe has changed, the way we need to think about culture has changed. And finally, in terms of pressures on this topic, I think polarization is a major issue these days. That's been very divisive. And so having intercultural agility helps us navigate that polarization.
Yeah, that's really good. Especially in our world today, when I hear the word polarization, for some reason my mind immediately goes to social media and how
Mhm.
polarized social media could be,
Yes.
especially if it continues to follow an algorithm that we are just so used to observing. It kind of just hardwires our brain to think in one sort of way as opposed to considering maybe the other, whether it's the other individual, the other person's culture, the other person's perspective. And I think uh, I could see why, you know, um, intercultural agility is going to be vital and important, especially in our time and in our world today. Would you agree with that?
Yes, very much so. I mean, and social media, for all of its benefits, one of the harms has
Right,
been potential for increased polarization based on the algorithms and what you're
right.
being fed all the time.
Yeah, that's good. Well, what are some like common mistakes people make when trying to engage across cultures?
Well, I think one of the more intimidating factors of engaging across cultures is maybe you feel like you have to know a lot about a certain
Mm,
nationality or ethnicity before you can even engage. So you don't want to go into something cold and look like a dummy and make a big mistake or insult someone. And so I think one mistake is feeling like, oh, I have to be a lot more of an expert in this subject matter before I can engage. And so
mm,
what they do is you try to avoid mistakes at all cost, and it's very stressful. You don't give yourself enough grace for making mistakes. So I think, feeling unprepared, feeling like you have to be perfect is a common mistake that can hold you back. But then on the flip side, maybe some mistakes that people make that could be offensive would be assuming that all members of one culture are the same. So all Ethiopians are like
mm,
this, or Asians do this. So trying to
mm,
lump everyone together and not being aware of personal cultural identity within larger group identity structures.
mm,
And then finally, I think trying to export your own culture while not receiving other people's culture to where cross cultural engagement becomes more of a one-way street. So,
mm,
the neighbor down the street just moved here from Iraq, and so you want to help them become more Americanized, and you're sharing a lot about American culture, but maybe not showing enough curiosity or respect towards their culture. And then it becomes like you're just exporting your culture, or it's just a one-way street. So
yeah.
those are just some observations that I've made and committed.
Yeah, committed to living out and teaching other
Well,
people
no,
on.
and I mean mistakes that I have made.
Got it. Got it. Yeah. I think to, I think, speak on behalf of, I think, all of humanity, if I can, we've all made that mistake. Um, yeah, I find that what I relate to when you talked about some of the challenges is that fear um, with wanting to know everything in order to connect cross culturally, which as a result paralyzes me from even connecting
Hmm.
or even trying to attempt to communicate or relate cross culturally.
Right.
And I think having to maybe look into that fear
Hmm.
and know that maybe you don't necessarily have to know everything, but you can know something and
Right.
work with that. Would you
Right.
agree?
Yes, just know something. Hmm.
Yeah, yeah, that's good. That's good. Well, as you know, Cindy, I mean, you and I, we work together, and you've been part of the Legacy in Motion cohorts, and you've taught several lessons in that cohort, and the really essence behind Legacy in Motion, and starting off with the cohort and then now into the podcast, is we're really trying to target leaders. And when I say leaders, I mean leaders in churches who are serving in intergenerational contexts. And so whether that's the first gen, the 1.5, or the second gen, to some extent, they're all leaders to some capacity. And so I want to ask you this question, knowing that context, is how can leaders cultivate humility while still remaining grounded in conviction and in truth? And if you mind, Cindy, maybe share a little bit of your perspective or your thoughts behind that word humility,
Mm.
because I think it might give a better framework as to what we mean by that.
Mhm. I've heard this quote somewhere, and I don't know if it was Gandhi or someone. I
Mm,
can't place it quite, but it said it went something along the lines of humility is not thinking less of yourself, but thinking about
mm,
yourself less.
yes, yes,
So it's not that you you devalue yourself, it's that you
right.
start to turn the spotlight on the other. So one of the first points that I thought about with this question was talk less and listen and observe more.
It's
So
good.
that's that whole don't think less of yourself, but think of yourself less and
Right.
talk less, just observe and listen more. So I think
Mm,
that is always a good approach into going into new spaces. And even to the extent that someone might think, wow, Sam is very shy. Sam doesn't talk. Sam is very introverted because
mm,
Sam is trying so hard to talk less and listen and observe more. So I think that's always a good step in any new space. And I think another way to cultivate humility is to take risks so
yeah,
that you make yourself dependent on God.
that's good. Mm,
Anytime you are trying to do something difficult, like intergenerational ministry, while trying to remain truthful to yourself and your convictions,
mm,
it's going to be risky. And sometimes our fear of failure, like we talked about when it comes to even engaging people of different cultures or different generations, it's just risky. And so being willing to like put yourself out there, get outside of your comfort zone,
right.
puts you in a place of dependence on the Lord.
Mm,
I think another way to approach this is to not jump into programming in ministry, but to work on cultivating relationships. And I think this can
that's
apply
really good.
very directly to intergenerational ministry, where if you cultivate that ministry, then there's trust. I
Mm,
wouldn't advise a group wanting to do intercultural ministry like, let's think of programs right away. Like, let's do this, let's do that. I think cultivate those relationships, which you were trying to do with
yeah,
the cohort.
yes.
Um, and then finally, part of intercultural agility training is realizing that your truth is not always someone else's truth and being okay with that.
Mm,
That's a lot easier said than done. Realizing that the way that you see something is not always the way someone else sees things. And I'm a mom to young adults, and boy, I've had a lot of conversations. We have an intergenerational relationship.
yeah.
We've had, conversations where the way that I see things from my 51-year-old woman's lens is different from the way my daughter sees things from her 20-year-old lens. And
Wow.
so what we
Mm,
perceive to be true in that situation is different depending on who we are. And so we have to kind of negotiate that a little bit.
yeah.
So those are just some initial thoughts that I have around how to cultivate humility.
Yeah, well, that's perfect because I think that's a great segue into, you know, practices and really practical tools on how to help people move from cultural awareness, which is good for us to have an awareness, but to then move into genuine cultural understanding. Um, how do we practically do that in our homes, in our ministries? You mentioned that you're the mother of young adults. Like, what are some things that you recognize in your own life that you could maybe give as a handle or practical tool to other people, whether in their homes or in ministry?
Mhm. Like most things in life, it's one thing to know something and it's another thing to actually practice or do it. So I think
Right.
intentionally putting yourself in places where you actually have to do and respond to growing in cultural awareness. So I think maybe the first, there's a term that we use in intercultural agility training, which
Mm,
is called stretching across
mm,
a cultural dimension. So if, let's say, you're more indirect and I'm more direct of a communicator,
mm,
then when we communicate to one another, I need to stretch and be a little more indirect, and then you might need to
mm,
stretch and be a little more direct in order for us to have good communication with one another. So, this idea of stretching outside of your comfort zone, stretching towards a culturally different other, is one practice that you can do.
oh, that's good.
I think it helps a lot if you are reflective and intentional and can name what you're actually doing. And in
Mm,
order to do that, you have to make space for some self reflection. So, as you are engaging people from different cultures, just sit with yourself for a little bit and just name the thing that made you feel like you were stretching
mm,
outside of your comfort zone. You know, what language, what thoughts, what emotions are connected to that thing that you were practicing. And the more you can talk about it and put words to it, I think the more you can grow and examine it. One thing that I found really helpful is getting feedback from trusted sources.
mm,
So if I'm culturally aware that something is not going well or I'm not understanding someone, find someone from that similar cultural background as the opposite person that you're trying to engage and just
right.
ask. Say, this is what I did. What do you think? Or
Totally.
if that person's from like an honor shame background, ask another person from a really strong honor shame background. Like, this is what I did. This is the
Wow.
situation. Like, what do you think? So that's been really helpful to me, especially when I was training volunteers to welcome refugees. I
Mm,
refugees for feedback on how our volunteers are doing, and it was very eye-opening for me. And then the last thing I'll say, this is probably pretty natural, maybe the no-brainer, is just to make friendships with people outside of your typical circle.
mm,
Make cultural understanding not just something that you do when it's convenient or when you have free time, but make it become more of your way of life, and your normal lifestyle is to be with people who are outside of, you know, your typical or most comfortable circle, to where you're stretching and you're learning and you're
mm.
growing all the time, you know, maybe not in like big monster steps, but at least in baby steps, to where those baby steps don't feel so intimidating after a while.
Very good. Yeah, very good. I was just thinking when you were talking about stretching and also naming the feeling while you're doing it. I kind of, if you don't mind me putting you on the spot, like what does that actually look like? Like when you're engaging and you're stretching and you're trying to meet the person where they're at to gain understanding, and you feel a
Hmm.
certain type of way, what does that actually look like? Like in while you're doing it, just to
Hmm.
kind of give like people a framework or like an idea of what that may look
You know, I think a concrete example would be, yeah, that's certainly helpful. Um, so I guess I could use the example of one of my favorite projects that I get to do
like.
is the Afghan Women's Bike Team. We train Afghan refugee women to ride bikes, and
Mm,
within that program, there's a lot of intercultural, you know, interaction, and it ranges from fun socializing
mm,
to people having a really hard time with their family, not
mm,
being able to find a job, economic struggles. So the topics that we talk about really run quite a wide range. And so sometimes when I am talking to one of the women about some of their economic struggles, honestly, I can't always tell if they're asking me for help, if they're just
Mm,
sharing what's difficult for them, if they think I ought to do something for them. Like riding bikes is really fun, but I need a job. And so
right.
sometimes in those situations, I feel confusion. I feel
Mm,
some guilt because I'm trying to figure out if I'm supposed to do more, if they're expecting more of me. I often feel helpless
yeah.
because I know
Mm,
that I can help them learn how to ride a bike, but I can't snap my fingers and get them a job or,
mm,
reunite them with their mom back in Afghanistan who they're missing desperately.
yeah, yeah,
So I try to name the emotions because in a vague sense, they feel yucky. Yucky is not a
right.
very helpful word for me. And so I try to name like, guilt, sometimes, yeah, helplessness, and then confusion. And then, so being able to name that, then I can then be a little more clear on what I'm feeling,
Yeah,
why I'm feeling it that way, and
yeah,
then if there's anything that I can do to help, it gives me a little bit of clarity. So, for instance, I'll give a related concrete example, this feeling of helplessness. I do feel that a lot when I'm with certain
mm,
people, some of my
mm,
refugee friends, whether they're from Afghanistan or not, because there's been a lot of cutting of funding and programs to refugees right now. And I honestly I'm running out of creativity of ideas of how to help them. And it's really up
yeah,
to maybe the agencies or up to a much more knowledgeable caseworker or whatever to help them. And so I've learned sometimes just to be more honest, and say, I really don't know how to help you, but you need to, call this person, or I think you can do this thing, but I personally cannot help you. And, you know, yeah, sometimes I feel really bad and I wish I could do
yeah,
more,
yeah,
but it helps me to have a clearer picture of my own limits.
yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Cindy. That's very honest and vulnerable. Um, I feel that this next question, I feel like, is more for me than it is for people. But um, I would love to ask you about how to navigate moments of misunderstanding
Mm,
or tension across cultures in a healthy way. Currently, I'm in a situation right now where there is a first generation individual who's in my life,
mm,
and he predominantly speaks Amharic, which is the Ethiopian native language, well, one of the uh, prominent native languages in Ethiopia. And I find that often, I would say majority of the time, there are moments of misunderstanding between him and I.
mm,
Part of that has to do with language. A lot of it has to do with culture. I'm born and raised in Canada. He's born and raised in Ethiopia, but is living here in North America.
mm,
And I find that sometimes I feel stuck. Like,
mm.
how do I communicate to this individual in a healthy way in the midst of misunderstanding or tension? And so, help me, Cindy,
No,
because
you help
I
me.
feel like, say that again.
I said, no, you help me.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe give your insights or yeah, something maybe that might.
Okay. This is a hard question, Sam.
Mm,
So some thoughts that I have, some of these are from learning it the hard way, is understanding that there's different modes of communication.
mm,
I think Western culture in particular is fairly heavy on words, like say what you mean what you say. But there
yeah.
are other forms of communication that we need to be keyed into, for example, body language.
Mm,
Um, Also, I mentioned earlier indirect versus direct communication. In my Western mindset, a yes is a yes and a no is a no. But in other cultures, what yes can be no. And that
Mm.
might feel like someone is lying to you or being dishonest, but in reality, they're driven by a desire to honor themselves or you. So they allow their yes to be no. Key example is, hey, are you going to come to my party? They say, yes, of course. No, they're not. They don't mean they're not planning on coming,
Yeah.
but it's so rude to tell someone to their face, no, I'm
Mm.
not coming to your party. So it's more honorable to say yes and not come than it is to say no. Whereas my American Western mind is like, look, if you're not going to come, just say no. But I
Yeah.
have to accept that in some cultures, there's a different mode of communication. So I think
Wow.
starting there helps. Um, and then there's this tool that we use in intercultural agility training called DIR. It stands for describe, interpret, and then respond or react.
Mm.
And it's a tool to help slow down your emotional response to a stressful situation. What you do is you first describe the interaction and you try to make it as bland and as unemotional and as objective as you can. Then you
Mm.
interpret, okay, so this is what this person did. This is what I think they meant.
Mm.
And then you respond emotionally. And this is how it made me feel. A lot of
Mm.
us jump straight to this is how it made me feel. And by employing DIR, it helps your brain to slow down and for your emotions to calm down. And so I like to use DIR when I'm talking with my husband about something that's stressing
Wow.
me out. I'll say, okay, I'm going to
Mm.
practice DIR on you. This
Yeah.
is what I saw. This is what I think they meant. And this is how it's making me feel. So that's just a tool. Something that I have utilized more and more in my life as I get older is meeting with a coach, having
Mm.
someone to bounce, you know, conflict or situations off of, just having that third perspective, I find very helpful. And then something else that is still pretty difficult for me, but I think is a valid way of dealing with a misunderstanding is utilizing a cultural broker or a third party intermediary,
Yeah. That's good.
someone who can be, again, just like that third person, so that if you and I are having conflict, doing it very directly might be difficult. But if we bring in a third person who, you know, maybe even has some status between us,
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
person can soften things with me, soften things with you, and
Mm.
then that can, again, be a healthy way of dealing with conflict that feels a little foreign to me as an American, but
Mm.
I think it's a valid way of dealing with cross cultural tension.
That's really good. Describe, interpret,
Yes.
respond.
Yes.
I love that. And bringing in a third party and getting some coaching that could
Hmm.
help in those moments of tension or misunderstanding. I love that you didn't just limit it to tension or misunderstanding between generations, but just generally in relationships, you will find that,
Hmm.
which is a reality. And I think the more we accept that reality, the maybe better we could deal with it.
Yes. And I'll add something about not wanting to seek help is that I think
Mm.
in some cultures, there is some shame around not being able to solve things on your own,
Very good.
very individualistic. And, you know, a lot of people say Americans are very like innocence guilt oriented, but really that there is a sense of shame of like, you should be able to take care of this by yourself. Like, no, we all need help
Yeah.
to
Wow.
get you the help you need.
Yeah. No, that's real, Cindy. I feel that I'm talking to a mentor right now who I was able to be vulnerable and open with him and share that sometimes my lack of asking for help does stem from this deep rooted shame
Mm,
around that. And I find that often that is what is holding me back. There is some narrative or story
hmm,
that for years maybe I've been told, or maybe that I believed, or maybe that I've heard or
mm,
grew up in, that has said it's actually shameful to be asking for help. You should
Right.
be independent and figure it out on your own.
Hmm.
And I find that I'm very happy you brought that up, because I find that people who are of my generation, or just really any other generation, but specifically for second gen younger people, I think if we were to really take introspect of
Hmm.
where we are and some of the reasons why we end up being in in a paralyzed state and we don't ask for help, majority of the time it's because of shame that we're
Right.
dealing with.
Right.
And I think I'm just personally coming into that realization.
Hmm.
And it's been helpful just to, as you said, like name it, like name
Hmm.
the feeling,
Yeah.
and then, work towards overcoming that.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm glad to hear you say that.
Yeah. Thank you. So, in your experience, what does it look like for the church to model intercultural wisdom well? Um,
Mm.
what does that look like?
I think if I just speak to the North American church context, I think we're still learning.
Mm,
I think we, in some ways, we are set up really well here in the United States to learn and grow in intercultural wisdom because of how diverse we are. But in our current season, there's just a lot of negativity around
mm,
difference in immigrants, and so that really grieves me. But I think in order for the church to model it well, we'll have to show curiosity.
yeah,
We'll
that's
have to
good.
be asking a lot of questions, and one of the top questions I think is, what is God doing in bringing these people from different countries to the United States? Not why are these people here? Not what are we going to do to solve this problem, but what is God doing?
Yeah.
Because when we put ourselves before God and we can we can recognize that he is up to something, then it will it'll foster curiosity rather than fear.
Mm,
So I think confront fear with curiosity. And when things change, there's anxiety when we don't understand what's happening with this change. There's understandable anxiety, but yeah, so show curiosity and ask, what is God doing? I think becoming cultural learners and not cultural critics. So people who
mm,
are oriented towards learning. And this is connected with curiosity, but the thing that I want to point to with being a cultural critic is that I think it's really important for us to avoid paternalism in the way that we look at other cultures. We
sorry,
have
can you define
Sure.
paternalism?
Paternalism is a view where you are superior to others,
Mm,
where you are judging other people's cultures based
mm,
on your culture as being normative, and you feel like you need to help other people become more like you
right.
because there's something wrong with their culture.
Wow. Good.
I think sometimes when we try to work interculturally, there is perhaps a subconscious assumption that in order for us to work together, it means that you have to assimilate to me and how I do things because I've been here longer and we're the normative culture, and so you have to change to match me rather than how can we both change to create that new cultural space between us. So I think yeah, just being careful about feeling like our culture is superior when you're trying to model wisdom. And then something that I really appreciate about Diaspora Network is our framework for mutuality,
Mm-hmm.
receiving one another's gifts,
Mm-hmm.
fostering friendship with one another, sharing resources. I think that is one of the best and most beautiful challenges for the church in this next generation is aiming for mutuality in which we view ourselves as equal partners, and where we are showing curiosity towards one another. But it's really a very kingdom-minded model, a very democratic model in which everyone has value.
Yeah, it's really good. It's starting to make me think a little bit about our ministry and our church,
Mm,
where we are seeing a little bit of uh, different ethnicities and groups starting to come into our church,
mm,
and you know the idea of intercultural agility and having to be wise in how we interact with
mm.
people who are different or grew up in a different culture than us is very important. So thank you for that. Last question for you: what encouragement would you give to younger leaders trying to faithfully lead in multicultural spaces? Any advice that you could give?
I'm so glad you asked me this question because my kids are Gen Z and I'm so excited about their generation. Maybe I'm
Mm.
biased because my kids are in that generation, but the young leaders today, they are, we like to say they are the future of the church, but they're
Hmm.
also the present of the church. They're not just like who we're grooming to lead in the future, they are leading today.
Yes.
And so I would encourage them to keep leading. There are seeds that need to be planted, there is still training that needs to be done, but they're leading in their own ways, first and foremost among their peers, but also among they're being leaders to older people as well in the ways that they know how to navigate social media, the ways in which younger leaders have had to grow up in an age where technology is changing so rapidly and they are able to adjust to it so well, where they are more aware of global conflict than my generation was. I'm so impressed with like my kids' friends for how well they kind of understand the way the world works, where I was just like watching like teeny boppy shows, when I was their age, and I was not totally clueless, but close to clueless, when I was 20,
Mm.
just because I didn't have everything, as accessible as these kids have it.
Mm.
I think young leaders today need to also, I would encourage them in accepting that multicultural ministry is hard.
Yeah.
I wouldn't try to sugarcoat it. I would say it is just hard. And hard things are worth it. Doing hard work, like God is in that, and He will shape your character. He will refine you into being a kind of leader who is able to take on hard things. And since it is hard, I would encourage them to access training resources. There is just, there's so many books, there's so many podcasts, there's so many church sermons and equipping programs out there to equip young leaders. So I would say, start pressing into those, start chasing those, get a mentor, get
Yeah.
someone who will walk alongside you and who will invest in your growth. And then I would just remind young leaders that throughout the ages, God has used young people to do
Hmm.
really huge things. I mean, look at King Josiah, look at
Yeah.
Joseph.
Hmm.
One of my favorites is Naaman's servant girl who
Mm.
told him how to get healed. I look at Paul's exhortations to Timothy. I look at Mark. I look at Mary, the mother of Jesus, and many others throughout Scripture. Young people who God used them, not despite their age, but maybe because of their age, to accomplish great things for Him. So
Yeah.
I'm really grateful to you, Sam, for your mentorship of so many young leaders trying to lead faithfully.
Yeah. Thank you, Cindy. Just to share this moment with you, I didn't tell you this, but I think you were leading prayer on one Tuesday morning, and you said something along the same lines, but you said something where you said that uh, the same God of David, the same
Mm,
God of Josiah, the same God that was then is also the same God now. And I just remember listening to that, and for some reason, it impacted me so much
Hmm.
because I was like, wow, I am serving the same God of the people that are written in the scriptures. And if he's with them, then he's
Hmm.
with me too. And
Amen.
if he did what he did with them, he can do the same thing with me too. I don't
Yeah.
know. It was just a moment where I felt so empowered
Hmm.
and came to this like eye-opening revelation of the same God of them is also the
Hmm.
same God who
Wow.
is with me
Hallelujah.
too. So thank you
Yeah.
for that. I really appreciate it. As we wrap up here, do you think there is anything that we should have talked about that we didn't talk about today? Okay, too.
Well, I really appreciate the topic, and it's, I'm actually going to be focusing on something related to intercultural agility for my doctoral thesis or dissertation, I should say. So this is something that I'm pondering a lot, and I I guess the final thing is be patient with yourself in learning intercultural agility. Um, it is not a crash course. It is something that takes a lot of time and a lot of practice. So I think it's really wonderful to have this conversation on the table, but show yourself a lot of grace. I know I've needed it, and it's a journey.
Thank you, Sydney. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you, Sam.
Yeah, thanks.